I'm pregnant, and I've been abandoned. I need a man who can give me love. And his response changes everything. You know that feeling when you're sitting on a park bench, and the whole world just keeps moving like nothing happened. Cars passing, leaves falling, people walking their dogs, and you're just frozen? Like someone hit pause on your life but forgot to tell the universe? That's exactly where you were that afternoon. It was one of those October days where the air smells like cold wood and wet earth, and the trees had turned that specific shade of burnt orange that almost feels too beautiful for how terrible you're feeling inside. You'd been sitting on that bench for almost 40 minutes, and you didn't even realize you were crying until a little girl, couldn't have been older than 6, walked right up to you, tilted her head to the side like a curious sparrow and said, "Are you okay? Your face is leaking." And God, that broke something open in you. Didn't it? Because you'd been holding it together all morning. You'd made coffee. You'd answered emails. You'd smiled at your reflection in the elevator mirror like everything was fine. But one sentence from a child with pigtails and mismatched socks, one tiny, honest, unfiltered question, and suddenly you couldn't pretend anymore. Her name was Lily, and her dad, a tall, quiet man with paint-stained knuckles and kind eyes the color of faded denim, came jogging over with that specific look that single dads get when their kid has wandered 2 steps too far. He was the kind of man who looked like he'd been through something heavy and carried it well. Not the loud, chest-puffed kind of strong, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up. His name was James. He sat down next to you, not too close, not too far, and he didn't say anything clever or try to fix it. He just asked, "Hey, you okay?" And you told him the truth. You said you needed someone to actually love you. Not your money, not what you represented. You. And he said real quiet, almost like he was thinking out loud, "Yeah, I think everybody deserves that." That was it. No grand speech, no pickup line, just that. And somehow, that was everything. Now, before we get into what happened next, and trust me, what happened next is the kind of thing that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. You have to understand something about who Ashley was before that bench, before that autumn afternoon, before James and Lily walked into her life like a correction the universe had been meaning to make for years. Ashley wasn't just wealthy, she was self-made wealthy, which is a completely different animal. By 24, she'd built a consulting firm from a laptop and a spare bedroom. By 27, she had 17 employees and a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown. She had the kind of discipline that made other people feel lazy just standing next to her. Color-coded planners, a skincare routine that took 11 minutes exactly, a savings account that her accountant called genuinely intimidating. But here's the thing about building a perfect life from scratch. Sometimes you're so focused on the architecture that you forget to check who you're letting inside. Brandon had been in her life for 3 years. 3 years of birthday dinners at the right restaurants, of weekends in the mountains, of him saying, "Babe, you work too hard," in that tone that sounded like concern, but looking back, was really just mild inconvenience. He was the kind of handsome that photographs well. The kind of charming that works in rooms full of people who aren't paying close attention. When Ashley found out she was pregnant, she genuinely, truly thought, that it would be a turning point, that it would make things real between them in a way that 3 years somehow hadn't. Instead, he went quiet, then distant, then gone. Just like that. A text message, "I'm not ready for this. I'm sorry." That was a Tuesday. By Friday, she'd seen a photo on Instagram, Diana's Instagram, her best friend of 8 years, her business partner, her emergency contact, of Brandon at some rooftop bar, laughing, drink in hand, arm around Diana like they'd been doing that for a long time. Because, as it turned out, they had. But you didn't know the full shape of that betrayal yet. Not on that bench, not that day. You just knew it hurt in a way that lived below language, in your chest, behind your sternum. That particular kind of pain that doesn't have a name because no one wants to admit it exists. James started texting you the next morning. Not romantic texts, Just the regular kind. Hey, Lily wanted me to check if your face was still leaking. And then, she also wanted to know if you like dinosaurs. Because apparently that's relevant. And then, 2 hours later, she says to tell you that Triceratops was the most misunderstood dinosaur and you should know that. I'm just the messenger. You laughed for the first time in 9 days. You two started meeting in that park every other afternoon. James would bring coffee in a battered thermos, always 2 cups. Always the right amount of sugar without you ever telling him. And Lily would drag leaves into elaborate piles and then destroy them with stunning theatrical commitment. You'd talk. About nothing. About everything. About what it felt like to be building something and have someone set fire to it while you were still inside. James told you about his ex-wife, Maya, who'd left when Lily was 18 months old, who now lived in Portland and called every other Sunday with the specific guilt rhythm of someone who knows they did something they can't undo. He didn't say it with bitterness, which honestly surprised you. He said it the way you'd describe weather. It happened. Lily's great. We're okay. You didn't understand how someone could carry that and still show up the way he did. Still pack Lily's lunch with a little note inside. Still fix the neighbor's fence on a Saturday just because the old man mentioned it was leaning. But you watched him do it. And something in you that had been clenched for years started, very slowly, to open. It was during your 3rd week of park afternoons that it happened. The thing that cracked everything open. Lily had left her little purple backpack on the bench, the one with the embroidered sunflowers that she dragged everywhere. And when you unzipped it to check for her snack container, a phone slid out. Not Lily's. Lily was 6. Lily didn't have a phone. It was a rose gold iPhone in a case with the initials DM embossed in gold on the back. Diana Mitchell. Your chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with October. You didn't mean to look. You really didn't. The screen lit up on its own, a notification, and the preview was right there before you could look away. Miss you already. Don't let her find out. Not yet. The contact name, B. You sat very, very still. The park kept moving around you. A jogger passed. A dog barked somewhere across the grass. Lily was 30 feet away building a fort out of sticks, humming something to herself. And you were sitting there holding a phone that had just confirmed what some quiet part of you had suspected for weeks, but hadn't let yourself say out loud. Diana hadn't just known about Brandon leaving. She was the reason he left. Your hands weren't shaking. That surprised you. You expected shaking. Instead, you felt something settle, cold and clear and precise, like the moment before a thunderstorm when everything goes completely still. You put the phone back in the bag. You zipped it up carefully. You set it exactly where you'd found it. And when James came back from the coffee cart with that battered thermos and those 2 cups, you looked at him and said very quietly, I need your help with something. And I need you to not ask me any questions until I'm ready to answer them. He sat down. He handed you your coffee. He looked at you for a long moment with those faded denim eyes. Okay, he said. Just that. And that single word, that uncomplicated, unhesitating okay, hit you somewhere so deep you had to look away so he wouldn't see your face do the thing it does when someone is unexpectedly kind to you. That night, you lay in bed with your hand on your stomach. The baby was just starting to make herself known, these tiny flickers that felt like someone tapping gently on a door. And you thought about Diana. 8 years. 8 years of knowing each other, covering for each other, building something together. You'd loaned her money twice. You'd sat with her in the hospital when her dad had that scare. You'd been there for the breakups, the panic attacks, the 2 a.m. calls that started with, I don't know, I just needed to hear a voice. And she had been sitting across from you at lunch 3 weeks ago, the week after Brandon left, and looked you in the eye and said, You deserve so much better than him, Ash. You really do. She'd said it with this expression on her face, soft and serious, like she meant it. You'd believed her. You stared at the ceiling for a long time. And then, very quietly, in the dark, alone in your apartment that cost more per month than most people make in 3, you made a decision. You weren't going to confront Diana tomorrow. You weren't going to send a furious text or show up at her door or do any of the things the anger in your chest was pushing you toward. You were going to be smart. You were going to be patient. You were going to find out everything first. Because here's the thing about being the kind of woman who built a company from a spare bedroom. You know that you don't burn a bridge before you've figured out exactly what's on the other side of it. And something told you, lying there in the dark with your hand on your stomach and the city humming 10 floors below, that whatever was on the other side of this was going to be worse than you thought. You just didn't know yet how right you were. You ever wake up and just know the day is going to change something? Not in a good way. Not in a bad way either, necessarily. Just in a permanent way. The kind of morning where you open your eyes and before you even check your phone, before the coffee, before any of it, something in your gut is already awake and already working, like it started without you. That was that Thursday morning. You woke up at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before your alarm, and lay there in the grey pre-dawn light, listening to the city slowly start to breathe again after the night. A garbage truck somewhere below. A pigeon on the windowsill doing that thing pigeons do where they sound mildly furious at everything. Your downstairs neighbor starting his shower, same as every morning, punctual as a clock. Everything ordinary. Everything the same. Except you. You sat up, put your feet on the cold hardwood floor. And you didn't reach for your phone. You just sat there for a moment, with your hand on your stomach, feeling that small, quiet presence inside you. That little flicker that was becoming less like a flutter and more like a personality. And you made yourself a promise, out loud, in the empty room. The kind of promise that sounds a little crazy when you say it to nobody, but that you need to hear in your own voice to make it real. I'm going to find out everything, and then I'm going to handle it. And you're never going to know any of this happened. The baby didn't respond, obviously, but somehow, that made it feel more sacred, like a secret between just the two of you. You called James at 7. You knew he'd be up. He was always up by 6, he'd told you once, because Lily had the internal clock of a farmer and the energy of a golden retriever, and mornings in his apartment were basically a controlled chaos situation that required full adult consciousness from the jump. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said, and you could hear the specific background noise of his mornings. Cartoons at low volume, the scrape of a chair, Lily saying something indistinct but urgent about a missing shoe. "I need to tell you something," you said. "Something I found yesterday. And I need to tell you before I lose my nerve." There was a brief pause. Then, "Let me put Lily in front of her cereal. Give me 30 seconds. You heard him move through his apartment, the small 3-room place he'd described to you once, the one with the radiator that clanged every night at 2 a.m. Like it had opinions, and the kitchen window that looked out onto someone else's fire escape, where a potted basil plant lived against all botanical logic. 30 seconds, exactly. Then the sound of a door closing softly. "Okay," he said. "I'm here. Tell me." And you did. You told him everything. About the phone. About the notification. About the initials on the case, and the text message preview, and the contact saved as B. You told him in one long, unbroken stream, the way you tell someone something you've been holding in your chest overnight, and that has started to feel physically heavy, like something with actual weight pressing against your ribs. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp dramatically or say no way, or fill the silence with reactions that were really just about him processing. He just listened. And when you finished, there were about 4 seconds of quiet. Then, "How long do you think it's been going on?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe it's nothing." Just straight to the real question. The one that mattered. "I don't know," you said. "But long enough that he was saved in her phone with a single letter. That's not a new situation. That's a system." "Yeah," he said. Quiet, certain. "That's what I was thinking too. Here's something nobody tells you about betrayal. The version that comes from a best friend is a completely different species from the version that comes from a lover. When a romantic partner betrays you, there's a template for it. There are movies about it. There are playlists. People know what to say, how to look at you, what kind of wine to bring over. The world has language for that particular wound. But when it's your best friend, when it's the person who knew the password to your email in case of emergency, who knew which scar on your knee came from which childhood fall, who knew the name of your childhood dog and your mother's birthday, and the specific way you cry when you're really upset, as opposed to when you're just frustrated. There's no playlist for that. There's just this hollow, echoey feeling. Like walking into a room you've been in 1,000 times and finding out the floor has been removed. You're standing in the doorway, looking down, and the familiarity of the walls makes the absence of the floor so much worse. Because you trusted the floor. You stopped checking for the floor because you'd been standing on it for 8 years without it ever giving way. That's what you were sitting with all morning. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and more devastating than rage. Something that felt a lot like grief. By 10 a.m. you were at your office, sitting behind your desk with a cup of tea you'd made but hadn't touched, and your laptop open to a window that wasn't work. You'd spent 40 minutes reading very carefully through the partnership agreement you and Diana had signed 4 years ago when you'd made her a co-director of the consulting arm of your company. You're thorough. You've always been thorough. Your contracts are the kind that your lawyer once described as aggressively detailed, which at the time you took as a compliment. And then you found it, buried in a clause on page 11, a discretionary expense category that Diana had full signing authority over, one you'd agreed to because you trusted her, because you were building something together, because it was Diana, and you didn't think you needed to watch Diana the way you watch strangers. You pulled up the company accounts. It took you exactly 19 minutes to find the first discrepancy, then another, then another. They were small, not the kind of thing that screams fraud immediately, the kind of thing that looks like rounding errors or vendor fluctuations if you're not looking for it. But you were looking for it now. And once you know what shape a thing is, you see it everywhere. 14 transactions over 8 months, totaling just under $60,000. $60,000. You sat back in your chair and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. The kind of ceiling looking that isn't really about the ceiling at all. The kind that's really just your brain needing somewhere neutral to point while it catches up with your heart. She wasn't just stealing your man, you thought. She was stealing your money, too. You called James again at noon. He was on his lunch break. He worked at a small architectural firm downtown. The kind that did residential renovations and the occasional community center. Nothing glamorous, but everything done with the specific care of someone who actually thinks about how spaces make people feel. He ate lunch at his desk most days, he told you. A sandwich he made in the morning. Same thing. Roughly, every day. Turkey and provolone on sourdough, a little too much mustard, which Lily called the yellow problem every time she saw it. When he picked up, you said, "I need a lawyer, a good one. Not the kind I use for contracts, the kind I use for something like this." A pause. Then, "My brother." "What?" "My brother. Marcus. He's been practicing for 11 years. Fraud cases, financial litigation, some family law. He's not flashy, but Ashley, he's really good, like actually good, not just good-looking on paper good." You hadn't even known James had a brother, which told you something about how much James didn't talk about himself, how he occupied space in conversations by asking about you, listening to you, without ever making it obvious that he was doing it. The kind of presence that gives more than it takes, quietly, without advertising itself. "Can you call him today?" you asked. "Already pulling up his number," James said. And there it was again. That thing he did. That uncomplicated, unhesitating yes energy. "No, let me think about it. No, are you sure that's the right move? Just forward, practical, present." You sat there holding your phone after you hung up and thought, not for the first time, where was this man 3 years ago? Marcus called you at 2:30. He had James's voice, but faster. More urban, like the same instrument played at a slightly higher tempo. He asked you questions with the precision of someone who had learned a long time ago that emotions and facts need to be handled in separate containers. Not because the emotions don't matter, but because mixing them too early makes both harder to work with. You walked him through everything: the phone, the messages, the accounts, the 14 transactions over 8 months. He was quiet in that specific lawyer quiet, the kind where you can feel them thinking, really thinking, not just waiting for their turn to speak. "Okay," he said finally. "Don't touch the accounts. Don't say anything to her. Don't change your behavior around her at all. Nothing that would signal she's being looked at. Can you do that?" "Yes," you said. "And the phone, the one Lily found. Is it back where it was?" "I put it back in the bag exactly as I found it. She got it back yesterday, I assume. She texted me last night like nothing happened." A beat. "She texted you last night?" "Yeah. To confirm lunch Friday." Marcus made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Something drier and more knowing than a laugh. "All right, here's what we're going to do." The next 72 hours were the longest of your life in the specific way that slow things along. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy and deliberate, like walking through deep water. You kept showing up. You answered Diana's texts. You confirmed Friday lunch. You sat in meetings with her twice that week and watched her talk about Q4 projections with the specific energy of someone who has absolutely no idea that the ground beneath them is becoming a trapdoor. And you smiled. You nodded. You said, "Good point, and let's circle back on that." And you poured her a coffee when you were pouring yourself one because that's what you always did. And she said, "Thanks, babe," the way she always did. With that particular Diana warmth that now felt like a costume. Something she put on over something else entirely. The acting didn't make you feel powerful. That's what surprised you. You expected the upper hand to feel like something. Instead, it just felt exhausting. It felt like being the only person in the room who knows the building is on fire, and having to pretend you can't smell smoke. Every time you looked at her perfectly blown-out hair, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the way she chewed her pen cap when she was concentrating, you thought about Brandon, about the rooftop bar photo, about "miss you already, don't let her find out, not yet, not yet." That "yet" had been living in your chest like a splinter since the moment you'd seen it. Because "yet" meant there had been a plan. At some point, Diana had intended for you to find out. On her timeline, in her way, when it was convenient for her. Which meant she'd been sitting across from you, for months probably, running a private countdown that you didn't know existed. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the betrayal itself, the management of it. The way she'd been handling you, like a situation to be controlled, rather than a person to be loved. Friday lunch arrived the way dreaded things always do, too quickly and in perfectly ordinary weather. A sandwich place 2 blocks from the office that you'd been going to together since year 1. Back when neither of you could afford the nicer spots, and this place did a chicken pesto panini that you still thought about sometimes in the context of simpler days. Diana was already there when you walked in, hair perfect, smile immediate. She stood up to hug you the way she always did, and you hugged her back the way you always did. And for just a second, just one, your body forgot what your brain knew, and you almost let it be normal. You almost let it be the 2 of you, lunch on a Friday, the way it had been for 8 years. Almost. You sat down. You looked at the menu you'd memorized years ago. And Diana started talking. About a client. About a scheduling issue. About something funny that happened in an Uber. And you listened, and you nodded, and you thought about Marcus, about the documents he was currently reviewing, about the case he was quietly, methodically building. And you thought about James. About that battered thermos. About, "Okay," said like a promise. About Lily asking if your face was still leaking. You smiled at something Diana said, and she smiled back, and it occurred to you, sitting there in that sandwich place that smelled like toasted bread and 8 years of genuine friendship, that the saddest thing about this moment wasn't the betrayal. It was that you were going to miss her. Not the Diana who had done this, but the Diana you thought she was. The one you'd invented, or maybe the one she'd been before whatever this was took over. You were going to grieve a person who was sitting right across from you, alive and well and eating a Capri salad, who had never actually existed the way you needed her to. And that specific, quiet, wordless grief was something nobody was going to write a song about, but you were going to carry it anyway. Because you were Ashley, and you had always carried your heavy things quietly, and alone, and without letting them slow you down. The difference now was that you didn't have to do it completely alone anymore, and that, small and new and fragile as it was, felt like the beginning of something. There's a specific kind of Saturday morning that only exists in autumn, where the light comes in sideways through the curtains, pale and thin like it's not quite sure it's allowed in yet, and the whole world outside feels muffled, like the city put on a sweater overnight, and everything got a little quieter, a little slower, a little more honest. You were sitting at your kitchen counter at 8:14 in the morning, both hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, not because you particularly loved chamomile, but because your doctor had suggested cutting back on caffeine, and you were trying. You were genuinely trying, and you were staring at nothing. Just that particular kind of staring that isn't spacing out. The kind that's actually very focused. The kind where your eyes go soft, but your mind goes sharp. Marcus had called the night before, and what he'd found had made the $60,000 look like a rounding error. Here's the thing about forensic accounting, and you'd learned this in the past 72 hours in a way that no business school course had ever prepared you for. It's less like finding a smoking gun and more like following a thread. You pull one loose end, and if you're patient, if you're methodical, if you know what you're looking for, the whole sweater starts to unravel. Slowly at first, then all at once. Marcus had brought in a colleague, a woman named Patricia, mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of quiet competence that makes you feel safe immediately. Like a doctor who explains things clearly without making you feel stupid for not already knowing them. She'd spent 2 days going through 4 years of company financials with the specific attention of someone who has seen every version of this particular kind of story and knows exactly where to look, too. What she found was this. Diana hadn't just been skimming from the discretionary account. That had been the beginning. Careful, small, testing the waters. Over time, it had grown. Vendor invoices for companies that didn't exist. Consulting fees paid to an LLC that traced back, through 2 layers of paperwork, to Diana's personal address. A licensing agreement with a firm that had been dissolved 8 months before the agreement was signed. The total, when Patricia laid it all out in a document that was somehow both devastating and incredibly boring in its formatting, was $237,000. Over 4 years. 4 years. You'd read that number 3 times when Marcus texted it to you. Then you'd put your phone face down on the counter. Then you'd walk to your bathroom, run cold water over your wrists the way your mother used to tell you to do when you were overwhelmed as a kid, and stood there at the sink for about 4 minutes just breathing. Then you'd walked back to the counter, picked up your phone, and called Marcus back. "Tell me what I need to do," you said. And he did. James came over that Saturday morning at 9:30. He brought Lily because it was his weekend, and he didn't have anyone to leave her with, and he'd asked apologetically if that was okay, and you'd said of course. Absolutely, please bring her, because, honestly, the idea of Lily being in your apartment, with her mismatched socks and her triceratops opinions and her complete inability to enter a room at less than full volume, felt like exactly the kind of specific antidote your apartment needed right now. She walked in and immediately identified 3 things that needed her attention. A throw pillow that was, in her professional assessment, in the wrong spot. A succulent on your windowsill that she declared a little sad but fixable, and your refrigerator, which she opened without asking and studied with the grave focus of a home inspector. "You have a lot of yogurt," she announced. "Yogurt," "I know," you said. "Why?" "I keep buying it thinking I'm going to eat it, and then I don't eat it." She considered this. "That's a yogurt problem," she concluded, and closed the refrigerator with the decisive click of someone who has said what needed to be said. James, standing just behind her, caught your eye over her head and gave you that look. That specific, helpless, apologetic, but also kind of proud look that parents get when their kid says something that is technically true and also a little devastating. And you felt something shift in your chest, not dramatically, just a quiet movement, like a door opening an inch. You sat at the kitchen table while Lily installed herself on your living room floor with a collection of small plastic animals she'd produced from her backpack like a magician, arranging them with the seriousness of a military general. James sat across from you with his coffee. He'd brought his own, in that battered thermos, as always, which you had come to think of as his version of a calling card, and you spread Marcus's preliminary documents on the table between you. He read them carefully. He didn't rush. He turned pages with that particular stillness he had, where his face didn't perform reactions. It just received information, absorbed it, processed it somewhere quiet and internal before responding. When he finished, he looked up. 237,000, he said. Not a question, just saying it out loud, the way you sometimes need to do with a number that big, just to hear it exist in actual air. Yeah, you said. And Brandon knew? Marcus thinks so. There are transfers that align with dates Brandon made certain. Decisions. About contracts, about client meetings he pushed to reschedule. Little things that didn't make sense at the time but make a lot of sense now. James nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around his thermos, the way he did when he was thinking hard. You'd notice this about him. The way his body had these specific physical gestures for specific internal states, like a language you were slowly learning to read. So he wasn't just her guy on the side, James said. He was, what? Her inside man. More like her smokescreen, you said. While everyone was watching the relationship, while I was watching the relationship, she was watching the money. The word she landed on the table between you two like something dropped. Heavy. Final. James looked at you for a moment. How are you doing with this, actually? And there it was. That question. The one that cuts through everything practical and asks about the thing underneath the documents and the dollar amounts and the strategy. The thing that you'd been carefully packaging in tasks and phone calls and action items so you didn't have to just feel it. Unmediated, in the open air. You opened your mouth to say fine, the way you always did, the word already formed and ready to go. And instead what came out was, I think I'm really sad. You hadn't planned to say that. It surprised you a little, the way true things sometimes surprise you when they come out before you've had a chance to edit them. James didn't say I know, or it's going to be okay, or any of the other things people say when they don't know what to do with someone else's sadness. He just nodded, slow and real, like your sadness made complete sense and didn't need to be fixed or reframed or rushed through. Yeah, he said. I'd be really sad too. From the living room, Lily's voice floated over with perfect timing. The elephant is in charge now. Everyone else has to listen. James closed his eyes briefly. Lily, it's a democracy, Daddy. The elephant won. You laughed. You didn't plan to. It just came out, the way laughs sometimes do when you're sad and something catches you off guard. And it was the kind of laugh that's right next to crying, that lives in the same neighborhood, that sometimes knocks on the wrong door. Your eyes went a little wet at the edges and you looked at the ceiling for a second to collect yourself. When you looked back down, James was watching you with an expression that you didn't have a word for. Not pity, not concern exactly. Something more like recognition. Like he knew exactly what kind of laugh that was, because he'd had that laugh too, at some point, in some version of his own hardest day. Marcus called at 11. You put him on speaker because James was there, and because you were past the point of managing information separately. You'd decided, sometime in the past week, that James was someone you could let inside the actual situation, not just the surface of it. That decision had been quiet and unannounced, the way the most important decisions sometimes are. Here's where we are, Marcus said, in that rapid, organized way of his. We have enough to file. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, potentially wire fraud depending on how some of these transfers were processed. What I need from you now is a decision. What kind of decision? Whether you want to give her a chance to make this right privately first, or whether you go straight to filing. You didn't even hesitate. What does going private get me? Potentially faster resolution, possibly money back quicker if she has it. But it also gives her time to move things, hide things, prepare, and it means Brandon sees it coming too. And filing. She wakes up one morning and it's already done. No warning, no preparation time. The first she hears about it is when she's served. You looked at James. He was looking back at you, and his expression was very calm and very clear, and he didn't say anything because he knew this wasn't his decision, but his eyes said, "You already know," and you did. "File," you said. Marcus made a small sound of professional satisfaction, the kind a surgeon makes when they confirm an incision point. "Okay. I'll need you in the office Monday morning. 8 a.m. Can you do that?" "I'll be there at 7:50, you said. That afternoon, you and James and Lily went back to the park. Because somehow that felt right. Going back to where it started, to the bench, to the burnt orange trees that were getting more stripped by the week as November leaned in closer. Lily ran ahead the way she always did, with her arms slightly out like she was perpetually considering flight as an option. And you and James walked behind her at that pace you'd developed together. Not slow exactly, but unhurried. Present. You didn't talk about Diana. You didn't talk about Marcus or the documents or Monday morning. You talked about stupid things. You talked about whether hot dogs counted as sandwiches. A debate Lily had apparently been waging at school with the intensity of a labor negotiation. You talked about a movie James had watched alone last Tuesday that had made him cry in a way he hadn't expected, and that he described with this specific, embarrassed self-awareness that made you like him so much more than if he'd just pretended not to have cried. You talked about what you'd been like at 7 years old. You'd been the kid who organized her bookshelves by color, and James had been the kid who took apart every electronic device he owned to see how it worked and could only put about half of them back together. So you were always like this, you said. Like what? The type who needs to understand how things work on the inside. He thought about that for a second. I guess yeah. Is that a problem? No, you said. And then, quieter. It's actually kind of rare. He didn't make it into a moment. He just nodded, like you'd confirmed something practical, and called ahead to Lily to stop trying to climb the decorative boulder near the fountain because last time she'd gotten her shoe stuck in a crack, and it had been a whole situation. But you noticed the way the tips of his ears went slightly red, and you filed that away in the place where you were keeping the small, growing collection of things about James that you didn't want to forget. The walk back to the parking lot, Lily had exhausted herself completely and was riding on James's back with her chin on his shoulder, eyes half closed, holding on to his jacket collar with both fists like a very tired, very satisfied little barnacle. He carried her without complaint, adjusting his grip when she shifted, talking to her softly about what they were going to have for dinner in a way that was really just a lullaby in disguise. You walked beside them and watched this ordinary, tender, completely unremarkable thing, and felt something so full it almost hurt. Because here was the thing that nobody tells you when your life falls apart, not the part about the betrayal or the money or the legal filings or the anger that comes in waves at 3 a.m. Nobody tells you about the other thing that happens simultaneously, running parallel to all that devastation like a second track, the way your eyes get recalibrated. The way, when everything fake has been stripped away, you suddenly see what's real with this almost painful clarity. Like your vision corrects itself. Like you'd been looking through glass that was slightly warped your whole life and you didn't know it. And now for the first time things have actual edges. Actual weight. Actual color. James and Lily had actual weight. They were real in a way that Brandon never was. In a way that Diana, as it turned out, never was either. Not because James was perfect. He was late sometimes, and he over-explained things when he was nervous, and he had this habit of tapping his thumb against his knee when he was thinking that he seemed completely unaware of. but because he was genuinely, consistently, unperformatively himself. Every single time, without effort, without agenda. That, you were realizing, was the rarest thing in the world. He buckled Lily into her car seat. She was fully asleep by now, one shoe inexplicably missing, a leaf stuck in her hair that neither of you had noticed until now, and closed the door gently. Then he stood there in the parking lot, in the late afternoon light, which had gone that particular thin gold of early November, and looked at you. "You okay?" he asked. Same question as always. But by now you understood that when James asked it, he meant something specific. He meant not okay like fine. Okay, like, are you still standing? Are you still in this? Are you still you? "I think so," you said. Which was true. Which was more than you would have been able to say 2 weeks ago. He nodded. And then, carefully, with the specific deliberateness of someone who doesn't do things accidentally, he reached out and put his hand briefly on your shoulder. Not a hug, not a romantic gesture. Just contact. The kind that says I see you without making it complicated. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then he dropped his hand, said, "Monday, you've got this." Got in his car and drove away. And you stood in that parking lot in the gold November light, one hand on your stomach, watching his taillights disappear around the corner, and you thought, I think I might actually be okay. Not yet. Not all the way. But in the direction of it. Pointing toward it, at least. Like a compass needle finding north after a long time spinning. Monday was coming. And you were ready. Monday arrived the way important days always do. Quietly. Without ceremony, like it had no idea what it was carrying. You were up at 5:30, showered, dressed, and standing in your kitchen by 6:15 in the dark blue stillness of early morning, wearing the charcoal blazer you'd bought 2 years ago for a meeting that had changed the trajectory of your company. You'd chosen it deliberately, not superstitiously. You weren't that kind of person. But intentionally. Because clothes are armor sometimes, and you knew what you were walking into. Marcus's office was on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old ambition. You arrived at 7:48. He was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled, 3 folders open on the desk, and a legal pad covered in handwriting so small it looked like a different alphabet. He looked up when you walked in, assessed you the way lawyers assess people, quick, thorough, clinically kind. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some," you said. "Good enough," he said, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Let's go." The filing took 2 hours. Not dramatic, just careful, methodical, relentless. Marcus walked you through every document, every clause, every count. Breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent misrepresentation, misappropriation of funds. The words were dry and technical and completely bloodless, which was somehow both easier and harder than you expected. Easier because the language kept it structural, kept it about facts and figures rather than 8 years of friendship dissolving in real time. Harder because every count was also a memory. Every fraudulent transaction had a date, and every date had a context. A lunch you'd had, a trip you'd taken, a moment where Diana had looked you in the eye and been something other than what she claimed. You signed where Marcus indicated. Steady hand, steady breath. When it was done, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at you with the expression of someone who has just watched a person do something difficult with grace. "It's filed," he said. "She'll be served within 48 hours. You nodded. You'd expected to feel something seismic when he said that. Relief, or fear, or the particular dizzy satisfaction of a door slamming shut. Instead you felt still, the way the air feels after a storm has passed. Not peaceful exactly. Just after. "What happens to Brandon?" you asked. "He's named as a co-conspirator in 2 of the counts. His financial involvement is documented. He'll be contacted." Marcus paused. "He's not going to have a good week." You looked at your hands for a moment. At the ring finger on your left hand, which was bare, which had never actually had anything on it despite 3 years of a relationship that had felt at the time like it was heading somewhere with a name. "Good," you said quietly. And you meant it without anger, just plainly, factually. The way you'd say good about rain when you'd planted something that needed water. Diana was served on Wednesday morning at 9:17 a.m. You know the exact time because Marcus texted it to you. You were in a client meeting when your phone buzzed on the table, face down, as always, and you felt the vibration against the wood like a small, private earthquake that only you could feel. You didn't check it until the meeting ended 20 minutes later. She's been served. Her attorney called already. It's real now. You sat in the conference room alone after everyone filed out. The table was long and polished and reflected the overhead lights in long, pale strips. You sat at the end of it and read the text twice and then put your phone down and just breathed. In and out, the specific breathing of someone processing the weight of a consequence they set in motion. Your phone buzzed again. Diana. You watched her name light up the screen. You let it ring. She called 4 more times over the next 2 hours. Then a text. "Ashley, please pick up. I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. Please just talk to me." You read it. You put your phone back in your pocket. There was nothing she could explain. That was the thing. Not because you were closed off, or rigid, or unforgiving, but because explanation requires a gap between what happened and what you know. And there was no gap here. Patricia's documents had been meticulous. Marcus's filing had been airtight. You knew exactly what it looked like because you knew exactly what it was. James called that evening. You were on your couch, shoes off, one hand on your stomach, watching the city lights come on through the window the way you sometimes did when you needed something to look at that wasn't asking anything of you. "How'd today feel?" he asked. "Weird," you said honestly. "Like I thought I'd feel more, but I mostly just feel tired." "That's what doing the right thing feels like sometimes," he said. "It doesn't always feel like a victory. Sometimes it just feels like you finally put down something heavy." You let that sit for a moment. Outside, a siren passed somewhere below, distant and fading. "Lily wants to know if your face is still leaking," he added. You laughed, that real laugh, the one that came from somewhere unguarded. "Tell her I'm doing better." She'll want specifics. "Tell her the elephant in charge made some good decisions today." A pause. Then James, away from the phone. "Lily, she says the elephant made good decisions." And Lily's voice in the background, satisfied and absolute. "I knew it. Elephants always do." By Thursday, the story had started to move in the way that stories like this move, quietly at first, then everywhere. Diana's attorney had reached out to Marcus with the specific, panicked energy of someone trying to negotiate before things got worse. Brandon had retained his own lawyer, which meant he was scared, which meant the documents had landed exactly where Marcus had intended them to land. You didn't celebrate. You didn't. That wasn't the kind of person you were. But you did allow yourself one quiet moment, standing at your office window, looking out at the city, where you acknowledged to yourself that you had done this. You had found it, understood it, built the case, and filed it. While pregnant. While grieving. While falling, slowly and unexpectedly, into something real, with a man who brought coffee in a battered thermos and raised a daughter who believed in democratic elephants. You had done all of that at the same time, and you were still standing. The baby moved, just once. A small, unmistakable shift. More purposeful than before, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. You put your hand flat against your stomach and stood there at the window in the Thursday afternoon light. "Yeah," you said softly. "We're still standing." There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over your life when the storm has passed, but the damage is still visible everywhere. Not silence exactly. More like the absence of the noise you'd gotten so used to that you'd stopped hearing it. The constant low hum of dread. The background static of waiting for the next thing to go wrong. By the 3rd week of November, that hum was gone. And the quiet it left behind felt strange. Wide, like a room with all the furniture removed, more space than you knew what to do with, and you kept walking carefully around the edges of where things used to be. Diana had stopped calling after day 4. Her attorney was handling everything now, which meant the conversation had moved out of the emotional register entirely and into the legal one, the one where everything is documented and measured and nobody says, "Please just talk to me" anymore, because there's nothing left to say that a lawyer can't say better. Brandon had gone completely silent. Not just to you. Marcus had heard through channels that he'd sublet his apartment and relocated temporarily, which was the specific move of a man who understood that what was coming was going to be public and who didn't want to be somewhere familiar when it arrived. Good, you thought. Let him be somewhere unfamiliar for a while. Let him know what that feels like. Thanksgiving that year was small, deliberately, specifically small. You'd always done Thanksgiving big before, the kind with 30 people and a catering situation, and Diana coordinating the seating chart with color-coded index cards because that was the kind of person she was. The kind who made everything look effortless while making sure everyone knew she was the one making it effortless. You'd loved those Thanksgivings. Or you thought you had. Looking back now, you understood that what you'd loved was the feeling of abundance, of being surrounded, of having a life full enough to need a seating chart. What you had instead this year was James's kitchen. His apartment was exactly as he'd described it, small and warm and slightly chaotic in the specific way of spaces actually lived in by a child. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up by magnets shaped like various U.S. states. There was a bookshelf in the living room that was half architecture books and half picture books, which you found genuinely, unreasonably charming. The radiator clanged exactly as advertised, a deep metallic complaint that happened every 20 minutes or so, like a grumpy punctuation mark. And James had clearly made peace with it years ago, because he didn't even look up when it happened. Lily had been preparing for this dinner since Monday. She'd made a handwritten menu, in crayon with illustrations, that included turkey, the orange stuff, sweet potatoes, bread that pulls apart, rolls, and, mysteriously, surprise. When you asked what the surprise was, she looked at you with the particular patience of someone dealing with a person who should already understand. "It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you," she said. "Fair," you said. "Very fair," she agreed, and went back to coloring her placemat. You and James cooked together, which turned out to be its own kind of revelation. You learned things in that kitchen that 4 months of park afternoons and phone calls hadn't told you. You learned that James was meticulous about temperature but cavalier about measurements, which drove you mildly insane in a way that was somehow also endearing. You learned that he hummed when he was focused, not a real song, just a low, tuneless sound, like his brain was generating ambient noise to keep itself company. You learned that he tasted everything at least twice before deciding it was ready, with this expression of serious concentration that made him look, briefly, like a completely different person, focused and precise and slightly unreachable, before he'd look up and catch you watching and come back to himself. "What?" he said, the third time he caught you. "Nothing," you said. "You keep looking at me like I'm doing something wrong." "You're not doing anything wrong." "Then why the look?" You turned back to the sweet potatoes you were mashing. "You hum when you cook." "I didn't know that." A pause. "Is that a problem?" "No," you said. "It's just new information." He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost to himself, "I didn't know I did that." "You do," you said. "It's not a real song. It's more like a frequency." Another pause. And then he laughed. A real one, surprised out of him, the kind that reaches his eyes. And the kitchen smelled like roasting turkey and sage and something warm and domestic that you didn't have a word for. And the radiator clanged its 20-minute opinion. And Lily called from the living room that she needed someone to spell delicious for her placemat. And you stood there in James's small kitchen in late November thinking, "Oh, so this is what it's supposed to feel like." The surprise, as it turned out, was a pie. Lily had made it herself. Mostly, James clarified quietly, with significant structural support. And it was technically a pumpkin pie, though the crust had a slightly abstract quality to it, that suggested a young artist making confident choices. She presented it after dinner with both hands and an expression of pure, uncomplicated pride. "I made it," she announced. "I can see that," you said. "It might taste a little different than normal pie." Different how? She considered this. More creative. It did taste a little different. There was something in it. Cardamom, James mouthed silently behind her head, too much cardamom, that gave it a specific quality that was not entirely traditional. "But you ate the whole slice, every bite, and told her it was the best pie you'd ever had, which was a lie in terms of flavor and the complete truth in terms of everything else." Lily accepted this with the dignity of a chef receiving her due. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch under a blanket with a cartoon still playing softly on the TV, you and James sat at his kitchen table with the remains of dinner between you and mugs of decaf that had gone slightly cool, and talked in that low, unhurried way of people who have run out of performance and are just being. He asked about the case. You told him where things stood, the negotiation Marcus was navigating, the timeline, what was likely to happen next. He listened carefully, and then asked one question that cut straight to the center. "How do you feel about Diana?" Not legally, just, how do you feel? You thought about it honestly. "I feel like I'm grieving someone who isn't dead," you said. Which is a strange kind of grief because there's no ceremony for it. No moment where people show up with food and say they're sorry. James nodded slowly. "I know that one," he said quietly. And you knew he did. You knew he was thinking about Maya, about 18 months old and Portland and every other Sunday, about the specific grief of a relationship that ends without ending, that leaves a shape in your life in the form of a child you love completely and a history you can't quite close the door on. "James," you said. "Yeah, thank you for all of this, for Marcus, for the park, for Thanksgiving, for just..." You stopped. Tried again. "I don't have a word for what you've done. But I want you to know, I know what it is." He looked at you across the table. The kitchen light was warm and low, and the only sounds were the television murmuring from the living room, and the radiator making its clockwork complaint, and the city doing its quiet late November thing outside the window. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I know I don't need to," you said. "I want to." He held your gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, slow, real, the way he did everything, and reached across the table and covered your hand with his. Not a statement, not a question, just contact, just, "I'm here. You turned your hand over and held his back. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall. Soft and unhurried, drifting past the kitchen window in the amber light of the street lamps below. The first snow always feels like a beginning, even when it falls in the middle of things, even when everything is still complicated and unresolved and technically in litigation. It still feels like a beginning. And sitting there in James's kitchen, holding his hand across a table covered in the wreckage of a good meal, with his daughter asleep in the next room and snow falling outside and something new and real and terrifyingly hopeful growing in your chest right alongside the new life growing beneath it, you let yourself believe it was. The settlement hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday of December. Marcus had prepared you for every possible version of that room. The version where Diana came in cooperative, the version where she came in defensive, the version where her attorney tried to reframe everything as a misunderstanding born of poor bookkeeping and good intentions. He'd walked you through responses, through posture, through the specific discipline of sitting across a table from someone who wronged you and not letting your face do the thing your chest is doing. What he hadn't prepared you for, because there was no preparing for it, was walking into that conference room and seeing Diana for the first time since the filing. She looked smaller. That was the first thing you noticed. Not physically. Diana was still the same woman with the same structured blazer and the same precise posture she'd maintained since college. But something in her had compressed. Like air had gone out of something that used to be inflated. Her attorney was beside her. A tall man with silver cufflinks who radiated the specific energy of someone billing by the 6-minute increment. Brandon wasn't there. His situation was being handled separately, Marcus had explained, in a way that was going to be significantly less comfortable for him. Diana looked up when you walked in. And for just a second, one single unguarded second before her attorney put a hand on her arm, and she looked away, her face did something complicated and real. Something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite shame, but lived in the territory where all three of those things share a border. You sat down across from her. You folded your hands on the table. You looked at Marcus, who gave you a small, steady nod. And you didn't say a word to her. Not one. The hearing lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Marcus was methodical and precise and utterly without theatrics, which turned out to be far more devastating than theatrics would have been. He presented the documentation the way you'd lay out tools before surgery. Each piece in order, each piece necessary, nothing wasted. Patricia's forensic report, the vendor invoices for companies that didn't exist. The LLC traced back to Diana's address. The timeline of Brandon's involvement cross-referenced with company decisions that had benefited the scheme. Diana's attorney made arguments. Marcus answered them. Diana sat very still and said very little, which told you everything about what her own counsel had advised her. At the 2-hour mark, there was a recess. You stood in the hallway outside the conference room with Marcus and a paper cup of water that you held but didn't drink. And he said quietly, "She's going to settle. Her attorney knows they can't win this. Give it another hour." "And Brandon?" "Brandon," Marcus said, with the particular economy of a man who has already handled that situation and found it satisfying, is having a very different kind of Tuesday. The settlement came at the 3-hour and 20-minute mark. Full restitution of the $237,000, to be paid in structured installments with legal enforcement attached to each one. Immediate removal from all company roles and dissolution of the partnership agreement. A non-disclosure agreement that ran both directions, which Marcus had insisted on and which Diana's attorney had accepted faster than expected, which told you that Diana had things she didn't want public just as much as you wanted your privacy protected. And one more thing. Marcus had added it quietly, almost as an afterthought, at the end of the negotiation. A formal written acknowledgement, signed, notarized, permanently on record, that Ashley had built the company. That every system, every client relationship, every dollar of legitimate revenue had originated with Ashley. That Diana's role had been contributory, not foundational. Diana's attorney had pushed back on that one. Diana had looked at the table. Marcus had said pleasantly and without flexibility, "It's in the document or we go to litigation, your client's choice." She signed it. "You were in the parking garage when your phone rang, James. You picked up immediately." "How'd it go?" he asked. You leaned against the cold concrete pillar beside your car and looked at the fluorescent light above you buzzing faintly in the garage. Silence, and took a long breath. "She signed everything," you said. A beat. Then, "All of it?" "All of it." The silence that followed was the good kind. The kind between two people who have been holding their breath together for weeks and are finally, simultaneously, exhaling. "Lily made you something," he said finally. "She's been working on it for 3 days. She won't tell me what it is. She just keeps saying it's for Ashley for when it's over." Your eyes went warm in a way you didn't try to stop. "Tell her it's over," you said. You drove to James's apartment directly from the garage, still in your charcoal blazer, still carrying Marcus's folder, still with the specific physical weight of a 3-hour 40-minute hearing in your body. You buzzed from downstairs and his voice came through the intercom immediately, like he'd been standing next to it. "Come up." Lily was waiting at the apartment door when it opened. She was wearing her dinosaur pajamas at 4 in the afternoon, which felt correct somehow, and she was holding something behind her back with the theatrical concealment of a child who has never once successfully hidden anything. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over," you said. She produced the thing from behind her back with both hands, the way she'd presented the pie at Thanksgiving. That same expression of pure, uncomplicated pride. It was a drawing. Crayon on construction paper, the slightly waxy smell of it reaching you before you'd fully registered what you were looking at. 3 figures, one tall with yellow hair, you presumably, though your hair was more brown than yellow, but you understood the artistic license. One tall with dark hair and what appeared to be a thermos, James, unmistakably. And one small figure in the middle with pigtails and what could only be described as extremely confident footwear. Above the 3 figures, in Lily's careful, enormous 6-year-old handwriting, My Family. You stared at that drawing for a long moment. The crayon lines slightly wobbly, the proportions enthusiastically approximate. The word family spelled correctly, which meant she'd looked it up or asked James. And either way, that meant she'd planned this, she'd meant this. She'd decided this was what she wanted to say. You crouched down to her level. Lily, you said. Your voice did the thing it does. Do you like it? She asked. I love it, you said. I really, really love it. She nodded, satisfied, and walked back inside like the matter was settled, because for her it was. James was in the kitchen. Of course he was. Thermos on the counter, 2 mugs out, the radiator already registering its clockwork opinion about the temperature. He looked at you when you came in and didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at you the way he did. That steady, unhurried looking that had become one of the things you'd come to need without quite realizing when it happened. How are you? He asked. And you knew what he meant. I think I'm really good, you said. And you meant it completely. Which was new. Which was different from the versions of fine and okay and getting there that you'd been offering for months. This was the real thing. Solid ground under both feet. He handed you a mug. You took it. James, you said. Yeah. I want to stay. He looked at you. Something in his face went very still and very open at the same time. Here? Here, you said. This, whatever this is. I want to stay in it. He was quiet for a moment. The radiator clanged. From the living room, Lily could be heard informing her plastic animals about recent developments, her tone suggesting the elephant remained firmly in control. I was hoping you'd say that, James said quietly. And that was it. No grand declaration. No orchestrated moment. Just 2 people in a small warm kitchen in December, holding mugs of coffee, having just said the true thing out loud. Sometimes that's all it takes. Your daughter was born on a Thursday in March, just after 6 in the morning, when the light was doing that particular pale gold thing it does in early spring. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, eyes that couldn't decide yet what color they wanted to be. James was there. He'd driven you to the hospital at 2 a.m. when you'd called, no hesitation, Lily asleep in the back seat because there was no one else, and it didn't matter, because she slept through the whole thing and woke up in a hospital waiting room chair to the news that there was someone new. She took this information very seriously, asked 2 clarifying questions, then nodded. She can be in the family picture, Lily decided. I'll make a new one. Diana made her first restitution payment in January, on time, as legally required. Brandon had quietly settled his portion separately, in a transaction that Marcus described only as appropriately uncomfortable for him, which told you everything you needed to know. He'd lost his business license in the state. He'd lost the apartment. He'd lost, most comprehensively, the version of himself he'd been performing for years. You didn't celebrate that either, but you noticed it, filed it in the place where you keep the things that confirm the world occasionally rights itself. The new family picture went up on James's refrigerator in April. 4 figures now, crayon on construction paper. Yellow-haired Ashley, dark-haired James with his thermos, pigtailed Lily in her confident footwear, and a very small new figure at the bottom, slightly smudged because Lily had redrawn it 3 times to get it right. Above all 4 of them, in that careful, enormous handwriting, My Family. Same words, more people. That's how it works, sometimes. You lose what was never real, and you find what actually is. You survive what you thought would break you, and you come out the other side not the same. Better. Clearer. More yourself than you've ever been. You're still standing. Both of you. All four of you.